Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown, and this is LA Currents. Well, the midterm elections introduced us to a lot of new faces with the LA City Council, and I'm delighted today to be joined by the representative of District 1, Eunisses Hernandez. So lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me,
And congratulations on the win.
Thank you.
I know it's been a couple months, but what was it that made you want to become a council member and represent the district that you live?
I was born and raised in this district and have lived there for over 30 years. And I saw, it's the same members in my community, the same people in my neighborhood, friends and family who were kept being left behind and experiencing crisis over and over again, whether it's loss of jobs, being impacted by the foster care system, having mental health or problematic substance use and not getting met with support. Those are the things that drove me to run, because I saw that the influence, especially the local influence that a council member has on their constituents. And I felt that, living there my whole life, I've seen how we've been left behind in many cases.
So these people that you witnessed and saw and are friends with, and what did they say when you were elected? Were they thrilled for you?
They were very thrilled, really happy, lots of messages of love and support. It was during our campaign when we were knocking on the 67,000 doors that we had to win this. It was constant coming up to a door and saying, oh, I went to high school with her, or I went to elementary school with her. And so it was just a wonderful feeling to see that during the campaign, but then all of them coming through, even till now, supporting and participating in the motions that were putting forward. So I feel like I got a whole village behind me.
And did you know a lot about what City Council does before you decided to take this bold and very brave move?
I did have an idea of what the council was responsible for. I have a decade of experience working on policy at the state level, getting bills authored by legislators and then signed by governors. I've worked on ballot initiatives at the state level, but also at the county level. And a lot of my work has focused on the county, trying to persuade the Board of Supervisors to move forward with mental health care, alternatives to incarceration. And so that gave me a framework and understanding of there's a big gap here on the city council where we could do so much to help our constituents directly. So I had a little bit of an idea when I came in. I wish people would have told me more, is what I keep saying. I'm like, we need to make sure that we are very clear about what this role is, especially for people coming into this role, because it is heavy. It is something that, makes me lose sleep at night, but because I want to make sure that we're doing it right, because I have a heavy sense of responsibility. I don't take it lightly.
Well, and to exactly your point, now you've had this experience, and this is a unique time, and I'm using that word unique sort of as a euphemism, with the LA City Council, because there's a lot of happenings that have really nothing to do with city business as usual. But how has it been so far for you? Obviously a learning curve, but also what has the literal experience been so far?
Well, you're right. We've been coming into a moment in history with the council where there's a lot of trials and tribulations. Yeah. And I am quite surprised at the amount of open arms that we're being received with, by the solidarity and by the collaboration and conversation over communication that we're having with our other colleagues on the council. I feel like it could have been very different. But I'm just really grateful and excited about the experiences that we've had so far, because they've been very welcoming at all levels. And we're also, trying to be diplomatic and strategic. And I think folks thought that I was going to walk in like a bull in a china shop. And, we're trying to accomplish a lot. And I think that others see that in bureaucracy and in City Hall, and they're welcoming us with open arms.
Well, that's really good news, because I know some of the meetings have not been easy to conduct. How is everyone holding up when it comes to understanding that voices need to be heard, but at the same time, business needs to be done?
I think that's where the over-communication comes in, because we're doing our due diligence to make sure that we're communicating with our constituents, with other people from other districts that are reaching out to us about why are we staying in the room? Why are we conducting ourselves the way we are? And that has helped a lot in both bringing people in to understand what we're doing, but also to build the political education of look, this is what the actual role and power of a council is. If you all want to have more influence on what's happening in that space, get involved in the electoral process. But we're also doing weekly videos to educate our constituents and everybody in the city of LA about what's happening in the council, what motions are coming through, what's happening in the committees. And we do that weekly. And we're seeing that our other colleagues are starting to do that as well and following that lead, which is very exciting, because that means other districts, other roles are getting that information to the people who are following them or their constituents, which is what we're trying to do, is over communicate to let folks know what's up.
Well, actually, it never hurts to over communicate, because it's only pieces of message that actually gets through first time around. I mean, every educator on the face of the earth has repeated and repeated and repeated, because that's the best way for something to eventually sink in. So I don't think that should be standard operating procedure, I think, in every role, in every job. But you had some, pretty bold things that you wanted to address. And so how is that going? Are any of your early term goals being reached, or are you really learning that some things take a little bit longer time than you expected?
Right now we are setting up our goals for our first year, 100 days, our 4-year goals, 8, 12. But right now what we're focusing on is meeting constituent services.
Got it.
And so our district was starved of services for many years, and since I've lived there. And so what we're doing is we have built a very strong field team, so that when people call us, when they email us, they get a response, whether it's, look, I don't have an answer for you now, but let me work on it, I'll get to you. And so that's where I'm focusing a lot of my energy. But we saw in the first 10 days of the year, the 3 losses of life due to LAPD shootings, that kind of pushed us to have to respond immediately to what was happening. We wanted to learn, we wanted to ease our way in, but we also have to respond to the crisis that's occurring. And we have put a few motions to figure out how we can build more steps of mediation, de-escalation, particularly in the chambers. And so I do think that we have some time to move forward some of these ideas and proposals that are a little heavier lifts, because they require more education. But I think also when crises arise, we have to meet the moment and not just continue to fly by it like if nothing happened.
In terms of who you are as a person, the idea of what is a democratic socialist? I mean, how do you define that? Because that can go in a million different ways, from a historic standpoint to a contemporary standpoint. So how do you see yourself in that position, and what is that to you?
So I see myself, and I see that role and that identity as a democratic socialist, as a person who opens up government to ordinary people. For people who have not had access to the government social safety nets, both in over communicating and sharing information, but also by bringing people in. And it's also in our policy development, asking ourselves our questions. Are we leaving anybody behind by moving this motion forward? Are we giving more money and more power to the systems that have harmed us by moving this motion forward? Or are we building something that we'll have to destroy in the future by moving this forward? And so thinking about the working class when we're trying to move policy forward, all of these questions to make sure we're not harming and impacting communities that are traditionally left behind, is how I see my role as a democratic socialist, and in building out the resources through the city to support our most vulnerable community members. We put a motion forward to develop an Office of Victim and Survivor Services, because in our first few weeks, we found out that there was a lot lacking in supporting families who have been harmed by violence. And so bringing them in to help us develop what that could look like, having the conversations with them, but also making sure that as a city, we're developing the social safety nets to support this family, whether it's helping them move to a new apartment, whether it's getting them food for the next few weeks. I think it's a lens, not just the title, but it's also of how you practice, policy development and community engagement.
Okay, so that makes me actually wonder about the services. So, helping families that have been affected by violence. Violence from what, where? Does it matter, or just violence at large? Violence from other family members, violence from community, violence from, the system? What does that mean?
I think it's a spectrum of all of those things, because we've had to help families who have lost people to state-sanctioned violence. We've had to help people who have been run over by cars while riding their bikes, and they've been left in a state where they cannot care for themselves. Figuring out how we can support them, how from a hospital, where do we transfer them to? So when we talk about Office of Survivors and Victim Services, it's just being able to support people who have experienced harm or have lost people to different types of violence. Because right now we have I'm a survivor of violence, of sexual assault, and I'm not a person who had the opportunity to go file a case and get services that way. Many families that I know also have not gone to put a case against someone, because they're afraid to engage the system, whether it's immigration status, whether it's different things. Then they don't get to access the victim services that currently exist. And so I wanted to create a space where and an office where anybody could go get services if they've been harmed, because people need support with burial fees. They need literally just money to feed their children. And so this is an opportunity to be able to create that social safety net for anybody that's been harmed in this spectrum of violence.
I will have to say, at large, it's always a matter of, even if the services are provided, how do you figure it out? How do you find it? I mean, we've created an environment in which even the most sophisticated, technologically advanced, educated individual still has to go through a maze when they're trying to determine, what do I do now? I mean, is that one of the priorities in your district as well?
Well, right now, it's us. Our office are the conduits to services. Our office is the conduits to care, to bringing in the various departments to make sure we can build the nets, which we didn't have a lot of models to pull from, because it's not a practice that's ingrained within LA City Council government or these council offices. And so it's a practice that we're building, but it is something that we want folks to know this is a one-stop shop, at least for our district. And hopefully the Office of Victim and Survivor Services ends up being a one-stop shop for people to get access and different pathways to care. Because you're right, for housing, you have to call HACLA, HUD, if you're under those agencies. If you need, transportation, if you need food, it's just so many places you have to reach out to. And when people have lost someone to violence, or if they've experienced violence themselves, it's hard just to live with the trauma, let alone have to navigate a whole system to get support and care.
Well, I immediately think of seniors and, the inability of a senior to actually either have access to somebody to help or even to understand the path to take.
The languages too.
Exactly. Okay. At one point in your life, you wanted to be a police officer. Something shifted. What shifted and why?
Yes. So, I grew up, I've lived in this neighborhood my whole life. I've seen a lot of my loved ones and friends impacted by criminalization when they needed access to care. One of my good friends was evicted from his home during our senior year when we had to take an AP history test that same day, I remember. He didn't recover from that trauma, and he's still bouncing from place to place because he was never able to fully recover housing because he developed problematic substance use from experiencing not having a home. One of my other friends was impacted by the foster care system, started selling marijuana, got arrested, ended up in the county jail for several weeks in early 2000s. That conviction ruined his life. We've legalized it now, but back then, that's a felony that would land you in jail, depending on what it was. And so I had a lot of veteran friends as well who came back with serious mental health needs from, going to Afghanistan and Iraq. And those experiences, seeing that, made me feel like, I need to be the cop that wouldn't have arrested my friend when I know he needed a job in housing. I could have been the cop that would have helped my other friend or helped this, stop the criminalization. I also, at some point, had to call 911 for intimate partner violence when we were renting rooms in my home during the recession. And I remember that LAPD didn't even get out of their cars in that moment. And so for me, I said, and they left us with the violent person in our home. And for me, I said, okay, I have to be the cop that helps people when they do need help. But when I went to school, I got my bachelor's in criminal justice. Most of my professors were former law enforcement. The program I graduated from at Cal State Long Beach tailors you to become law enforcement. But I also took some classes around the war on drugs, which put a lot of dots together for the experiences that I had seen growing up. I also took a class around the criminological theory, which teaches you a lot of the reasons why people commit crime. And that also connected a lot of dots for me. A lot of it is around poverty, lack of access, lack of opportunity. And so at the end of my degree, I was like, I'm not going to be able to change this system by myself. And so I really struggled after that to find a job. I was working in valet when I graduated from my bachelor's degree. And it took me about a year to find a job in policy. The universe landed me in this space, and my first job was with the Drug Policy Alliance as a criminal justice intern. But it was those classes, that transformation, those professors that really shifted my view on where the actual power lies, where influence lies, where you can actually make changes. Like as a police officer, you're implementing laws. But as a legislator, you're writing the laws. And so that made it clear for me, like I have to try to find a different pathway to try to help our communities.
Well, it's an interesting position you're in now, because you also now have the responsibility to protect a community.
Yes.
And to make sure that, they are not victims of the violence that might come from somebody who is, perpetrating a crime.
Yes.
So now you have to walk this very tonal path between protecting the community that you have promised to serve, as well as protecting the individual from being a victim of the system. So what are your hopes there? I mean, working with the LAPD, working with community policing to make the safety issues at stake, but an important thing as well as fixing the way people end up in spaces that they're in, places to go if they're not really the criminal that they look like they are based on a criminal record or something. How is this all going to work out?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that's why why it's so important that I'm in this seat, because in no other moment in history have we funded the current system of crisis response like we do today. We don't have a true system that prevents harm and violence. Only a system that really responds after the harm and violence has been committed already. And so the work that I have done at the state and at the county level has been to build out responses, services, and prevention to keep the harm from occurring in the first place. And that's what I see my role as right now, because we have, a really big budget, but my goal is to advocate for some of that budget to go into prevention, to go into services for young people, into mental health, into drug treatment, into permanent supportive housing, because we don't have enough of that. We don't have enough of a system that prevents harm. And that's why I see my goal. I'm working with all stakeholders. I've already met with Chief Moore. I'm continuing to meet with the rest of the departments and the county as well, because I also see my role as being a bridge builder of bringing those county services that have been effective at preventing harm and violence to the city. So we're still navigating it, but I see this role in particular of mine very clear in what I'm supposed to be doing, and that's in trying to prevent harm and violence from happening in the first place.
So as a council at large, I mean, this is going to, be available for people to watch for a long time. So, not necessarily in this moment in time, but there have been some things that have already happened since the midterms. There was the tenant protection and relocation assistance. There is the library mental health assist. There's the elimination of gender terms within any of the LA information that's available through the city. So how has all that been playing out, and how are all those priorities put together within the council itself, and how do you feel about these things so far?
I'm very excited about all of the things that you've mentioned passing, particularly the rent debt threshold, the tenant protections. CD1 is 60% tenants, and we have some of the most densest neighborhoods of tenants. And so for many years, we've seen that there haven't been enough protections to keep folks housed. And I see my role in this is like stopping the eviction to homelessness pipeline. And what I think about all these other motions in particular coming out now is that it does show that for many of these important items, we are all on the same page. Many of these items didn't receive huge amendments. The tenants is different, where we're coming together. There were amendments, but we came together. Many people thought that it would be impossible, but I think it goes to show where we are in the collaboration and the relationships that we're building on the council, and it's just the beginning. These are phenomenal motions that have passed, but I am really excited about removing all the gendered language from, our city documents, and I can't wait till we push more. Like we have many ideas that we want to get across the finish line, but these are a great start, and I have a lot of hope.
Some things haven't necessarily moved as fast as you as you wanted. You were very strong proponent of Measure J. So I guess the first question is, what is Measure J? And the second question is, what's the status of it right now?
So Measure J is a ballot initiative that community members got together to write. I was one of the co-authors of that, was one of the co-chairs of that ballot initiative at the LA County level, which says 10% of locally generated tax dollars in the budget needs to be shifted into supporting young people, small businesses, housing, mental health access, drug treatment. That ballot initiative in 2020 passed with over 50% support. Over 2 million voters in LA County approved it. What happened was that later that same year, law enforcement special interest groups sued the county to stop Measure J. And Measure J right now it's paused and it's in the courts. That case is moving forward. We'll see what the outcome of it is. I heard that it would be between 1 and 3 years before we would know. But the thing about Measure J is that the county never needed Measure J to move that money. Measure J created the political landscape for them to do it, but they already have that power within their budget power to shift that money. And so that's exactly what the Board of Supervisors did. They created what's called the Care First Community Investment Fund, which is essentially Measure J. And this, there was a work group that was created. There's been several years of work that they have done to develop different recommendations. They already have, I think they're going to be going into their year 3 of deliberations about what they're going to fund in year 3. But millions of dollars have already been dispersed into to community organizations to support mothers and their families in, a drug treatment, to expand mental health care, to support young people. Dollars are coming out. So I get chills thinking about it, because folks try to stop it, but it's happening. I've met people that work at these organizations that say, we just got a grant of $200,000 from Measure J so we can support our folks. And so it's something one of the things I'm most proud of in my whole life.
Wow. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And one of the things that, of course, I am not a policy expert or a political expert or an expert in anything, frankly, but I didn't know that you could almost table something that had been voted in by the people, and what would have happened had the county not moved on their own. I mean, that's an interesting thing to even think of from a constituency standpoint, to see what happens when you do vote. Sometimes it doesn't actually go through the way you thought it would.
Yes. And then sometimes they do.
Yeah, exactly. So you said that you're very much participating in getting out and meeting the community and communicating with them. What are some of the ways you're doing that? How are you making sure that you're listening to the people? Because you are, but are you having them come to the office? Are you going out? Do you have field teams? How's it all working?
Yes, so we have a very strong field team that is out in community regularly. We're particularly starting to engage encampments in our district. But I do weekly recap videos of letting people know what we've done that week, both in council and in our committees. And I'm also taking tons of meetings. I'm booked until April. Just in January, I think we had over 50 external meetings with different organizations, community members, different community events. That doesn't count internal team meetings. And so I'm trying to make myself as available as possible and as accessible, and our team accessible as possible, because I had mentioned earlier, it's a district that has a lot of needs. And frankly, we have to meet people where they're at, because for many parts of our district, folks don't know how to engage their council offices. They don't even know what their council offices are responsible for or what they can help with. So that's why our recap videos are so important, but also we started a series called City Hall 101, where we take on different items and educate people on, look, this is where you can find city council files. We're teaching folks how to use 311. We're teaching folks how to use different city tools so that they can, have better information, but also know when to move their car if they're street cleaning. But and we're doing it in different languages too. And our field team, we also took that into account, making sure that we had folks who spoke Spanish, Cantonese, so that regardless of who called, that they would have access to someone they can speak to, both at City Hall, but also out in community. So we're meeting people where they're at, whether it's on their phones, in their hands, or even at the door, because we also will continue to canvass our district for folks that don't have social media, that aren't following the City Hall 101 or the weekly recaps. We all have a team of people who are going to start canvassing our district to share information about the tenant protections, to share information about bulky items in 311, because we want to make sure people have access to all the services that they deserve.
So there's an enormous, outward effort for education, but what have you learned? I mean, because obviously you are passionate, and that's apparent with a capital A. You are involved and you are energetic in what you want to do, but what have you learned now that you're in this position versus, taking one particular issue? Now you're getting everybody's issues. So what's been a surprise?
What has been a surprise?
So
many things have been a surprise. Yeah. It's patience, I feel. As being a person who has advocated on the outside as a community organizer, coalition builder, we always have to remind ourselves, this is a marathon. It's going to take a long time. And it's easier to understand and grapple with when you're on the outside, because you really have not much. You can influence and move, but not as much as you would like, right? Because you're trying to persuade somebody. But being on the inside, it's I'm already persuaded. So how do we start doing? How do we move this bureaucracy to catch up with the needs and demands of our communities today? And for me, that's just something that I'm, again, reminding myself, like, this is a marathon, have to have patience, because there's a lot of barriers to moving things, but that does not deter us. It's just like, it's not a no. It's like, how do we get across this? How do we get around this barrier to achieve our goal of supporting our constituents and responding effectively? So I think that's, for me, one of the biggest learning curves right now.
Well, are you also hearing things like, because there's big picture items, the issues of homelessness
Yes.
and law enforcement and all kinds of large, heavy things. Are you also hearing from people who say, I just want, a nice spot for my dog to go out in the grass? Or are you also hearing small things like, can I please have a street light so that, I can cross the street, so I can get to the store or something like that? Are you getting a lot of that from your constituency as well?
Yes. Our community and our district and our constituents have been starved of city services, particularly the south side of our district and the hillside parts of our district, such as Mount Washington. And so we're getting a lot of calls and outreach around, we need cement roads. We have a vehicle stuck, the fire trucks can't get up, we have potholes. And so that's where our 311 has come, and our education has come into play, because
now they know what to
do. And it gives us an opportunity to track calls that are coming in, so that as a council office, we can call and follow up with the departments. But it's also educating our folks, like, right, I understand that you need a street light out, yet our Bureau of Streetlight Department has a very large vacancy rate, like many of our other city departments. So it might be a small thing that you need, but it's tied to this bigger situation that we're also trying to address, trying to get more people hired on quickly so that we can, create speed bumps, more bike lanes. So it's challenging, but it's deeper, longer conversations with folks about some of these issues that aren't just black and white, or seem that they should be pretty simple, which they should, but it'll take some time before we can make it that way.
Well, at least there's something that they can understand, and
yes,
something that you can answer with. But this has nothing to do with really anything, but did you have a mentor?
I did have several. I have several mentors, and I'm lucky in that, Supervisor Holly Mitchell, Supervisor Hilda Solis have both been mentors of mine at different levels. One of the first bills that I ever got to work on at the state level was with Supervisor Holly Mitchell when she was a senator. Mm-hmm. When I was working at the county level to stop a $3.5 billion jail contract that they wanted to build 2 new jails, Supervisor Solis, who was one of our champions that I got to work with closely. And so those are the people that I check in with, but that also have taught me how to navigate diplomatically and not diplomatically. And those are the people I think about when you ask me that question, that have invested in me.
And there's also, now, you talk about the County Board of Supervisors, all the women on there, and now there's a lot of representation on the LA City Council. Eventually, that'll be a topic that won't even be needed to be discussed, because it will just be standard operating procedure and no one will even think about it. But is it working?
I think it is working. I can't wait till we get to a moment where it's not a topic of conversation. Mm-hmm. I can't wait till we have a space where we have openly two-spirit, transgender, LGBTQ folks on the council. And I'm grateful for the number of women that we have now. And I'm going to be doing whatever I can to push that expansion so that it becomes a mute conversation.
All right. Now, if anyone wants to find out what's going on with CD1 or find out what's happening with you, what's the best way for them to find out?
The 2 best ways that folks can find out what's happening in CD1 are to go to our Twitter or Instagram, which is CD1 Los Angeles, and they can go to our website at cd1.lacity.gov.
Perfect. All right. Well, I look forward to talking to you again very, very soon.
I can't wait. Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap on this LA Currents.